Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming this evening to our meeting. We've got a slightly delayed start, as you can see from the clock, but we're ready to go now. Do we have any apologies?
I have not received any apologies, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before I actually start the meeting, can I say I'm having a problem reading? I've had my eyes operated on, and I can see you clearly down there, but this is a bit gobbledygooky. You probably won't notice. Right, minutes of the last meeting are in the paper copy of the agenda. Any comments? Are you happy that I sign them as a record of the meeting? Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest? We have no public questions, so do we have any member questions? We haven't received any, so no. Item 14 will be finished very quickly if we keep going at this rate. Review of the draft street trading policy, which is in the orangey coloured brochure. I'm hoping that you've all read it. There are some significant changes in it from previously, and we've clearly learned from what's happened to us as we've gone through trading years, and it's become a bit more sophisticated. Does anyone have any questions? Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Not really questions, some observations, if that's okay. Is that all right? Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I wanted to, as you've mentioned, it's quite different to the previous policy. And my first comment really would be to thank officers for the work that they've gone into. I think this is a significant upgrade on what we had before. So I recognise that they've put a huge amount of effort in, and also in trying to update it and cover a lot more eventualities. So I just wanted to sort of, first of all, express my thanks to officers, because I thought it was a really, really good job. Having said that, there are a couple of things that I thought which we might want to just look at. And I have emailed this through to Kieran, but he asked me to bring it up at this meeting, which is the proper process. So he is aware of these.
Would you like to give us the page numbers?
I can. If you look at the pack that we were given, this is the pack numbers, page numbers, rather than the pages of the policy. So it's the pack page 17, which has a green number 9 at the top in the left-hand corner. So it's section 7, and I'm looking at the second paragraph, number 2, at the top of that page, if people have found that at all. So the first thing I was going to suggest was if you flip back a page, I think we've actually got a 1 and 2 already, and this is actually should be numbered 3 at this, underneath those bullets. So just before section 8, I think it should be number 3, which is a terribly minor thing, but I know sometimes with formatting of documents, these things can happen. So just an observation. The other comment I've got on this is regarding the thing that's currently number 2 in there, which says, in order to avoid any one trader developing a monopoly, the maximum number of consents that a trader or business shall be able to use at any one time in the borough of Wokingham shall be 1. And that's useful. I just wonder if we might be able to add in something, because this did come up recently at an appeal, in terms of if you have a married couple and they're trading independently, can they each have a licence, or is it 1 per family? And I just thought maybe we could further define this in terms of what a business is very clear. But what do we mean by trader? Do we mean that as 1 individual, or do we mean that if you're married to somebody, then both partners can't have a trader? I think Pauline wants to come in, if that's okay. I'll yield the floor, Madam Chairman, for a moment, if I may.
Thank you, Stephen. I was just, interesting point. I was just thinking I would have suggested that saying that you could only have 1 per family would probably be discriminatory, in that, so I would suggest maybe 1 per company or something like that would be better. Otherwise, you're right, it could be confused. either that or one per individual. I don't really mind. I mean, I can see arguments for why you might want more than one per individual in some cases. People might want to move around pitches on different days and that sort of thing. But I would suggest if you're going to only have one, then one per company.
I think just on that point, Pauline, if a company is set up, a company has a number of directors, they have equal rights, do they not? So, in other words, it's a bit difficult. Would it not be just have one person? If there are 3 directors, they have equal shares in a company. So you would have thought that actually each one of them could be the trader in that
Which is
case.
why say one per company, it's nice and clean.
Yeah, if it's going to be limited, perhaps from that point of view, yes, per company. But I was just thinking from the director's point of view.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I mean, this was very much in line with my thinking that it should possibly say one business partner, or one company, or partnership, or sole trader. Because if the person is truly a sole trader and their partner is a sole trader, then they should be treated legally, they are separate, and therefore they could do that. So I just think maybe if you can have a look at that, please, in the definitions, that would be great. If I can continue on page 17, section 8 and the paragraph numbered 5, and this reads, existing businesses whose food hygiene rating falls below a 3 will have their street trading consent automatically suspended by a licensing officer through officer delegated authority. I'm absolutely fine with that. What I was going to suggest was that we then install a bit about re-inspections we required within a 3-month period, so they've got a bit of time to sort it out, but not an unlimited time, and will also be the consent holder's expense, so they will have to pay for a second inspection. Again, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Stephen, again. I understand what you're trying to do there, but are we discriminating against mobile traders? Do we shut restaurants down that have got a rating of 3 or less? It doesn't seem fair to me to discriminate against a mobile van and continue to let a restaurant with a rating of 3 trade. Doesn't sit well with me that you're saying that business somehow is more constrained or more dangerous or whatever it is because it's on wheels, rather than treating all food outlets the same.
I think we already have that in the policy. Kieran, can you confirm those details?
This would be a new addition to the policy. It would be a strengthening of food safety provision, whereby if a food safety inspection results in a scoring below 3, the policy would provide that a licensing officer could suspend that licence, and that would not apply to a restaurant that doesn't have a street trading consent. So there is a difference.
And that doesn't seem fair to me. What you're doing is discriminating against a street trader rather than a restaurant. It's the same thing, they're providing food. Either they should be treated the same. Well, they should be treated the same. It doesn't seem right that if you happen to be a street trader on wheels, then you get treated much more harshly than a restaurant. It just doesn't seem correct to me.
Could we... I've lost the use of my fingers as well. Can we go into what happens when someone drops below the required standard and what happens about re-inspections and time and payment? Because that does cover some of that.
Yes. So any business that would want to have a regrading would have to pay for a rescore. So they would, so a business could accept the scoring as a satisfactory or below satisfactory scoring, but if they wanted to regrade or they wanted to have a re-inspection, then they would pay for an environmental health officer to regrade. So that's present as it stands now. In terms of this policy, it applies to mobile traders or traders with pitches for street trading consents, and with that the policy is worded with a more robust approach, whereby the consent itself would also be suspended. So it's a much stronger stance. It would also put the trader in a position to arrange a regrading inspection as well, which would be a cost to the trader. The concept is to maintain high standards with mobile traders.
So I think that's completely unfair. You've got a kebab shop in a building which can trade as a 3, and you've got a kebab shop that happens to be in a van which can't trade as a 3, and that's just not right. You've got to have a level playing field. That just doesn't seem fair. I mean, by all means, if you want to stop everybody trading if they've got a 3, absolutely fine. But to have a tilted balance is wrong.
Pauline, this policy doesn't cover restaurants, it's only street traders. Yeah, yeah.
Two things. Firstly, I completely agree with Pauline. I think this would be discriminatory to those with mobile food environments. If we think food hygiene level 3 is a requirement for if you like health and safety, then health anyway, then it is definitely the case for restaurants. So I completely agree with that. The second question is, this is an upgrade. I've got no issues with the idea of bringing in an upgrade, but I'm just not quite clear what the impact will be on the traders who currently don't have hygiene levels to that. How much does it cost them to upgrade to that level? And my assumption would be this would only happen at the end of their current license. I'd just like to confirm that there'll be no changes until that happens, because they need a period of time to put in whatever the effort is. So I'd like to know how much effort we think that would be for those traders and cost, and just a confirmation it would be they'd have time to do that. So until the next time that their license is up for review.
So as it stands, this is a draft, so it's a revised draft policy. So before the committee night this evening is a draft version of a street trading policy, and we are without a consultation on this draft. What's proposed this evening from the officer's perspective is to put forward a 12-week consultation to gather views, and those views would come from the traders themselves and businesses and locals, but also from responsible authorities, trading standards and public health. So you'd get a number of views, and with that data that would then come before the licensing committee for a determination on the actual content of the policy. That would be around October later this year. The costs, I believe, I can confirm the cost later on, but I believe they're around £200 for a rescore visit this year. And of course, they would only be engaged in terms of the cost should the rating be lower than a 3.
Could I propose that we ask the executive to consider removing that clause on the basis that it does discriminate on mobile traders versus people in identical circumstances selling identical kebabs in a restaurant which doesn't happen to have wheels? I'd like to propose that the executive consider one of our recommendations that the executive consider removing that clause as discriminatory or unfair.
Stephen?
Hang on, I'd like
Sorry.
Yes. I totally agree that we shouldn't be discriminatory. I think it's a separate matter whether we try and raise standards, and we should then be doing that across the piece. So I certainly would support what you're saying there. I think to the other point I was trying to make on this was that whatever level is set, so if it reverts to maybe a level 1, they've got to have, whatever the level of failure is, that any re-inspections have to be at the expense of the consent holder. And I just wasn't sure that was specified in this policy, which is why I was trying to say that we should set that outright, that there's no expectation from anybody that if they are re-inspected that they don't pay for it. I'm just trying to be real belts and braces on it, is what I'm trying to do. So there's no areas for confusion or causing upset where people have a different expectation. I think we're all aligned. It's just a question of making sure that the policy reflects that. Sorry, do you want to come back again? Yeah.
I think I heard Stephen seconding it, so would it be possible to have a vote on that recommendation?
Please ask Kieran to explain the difference between this policy for street trading and the policy for restaurants.
I think we understand the difference. He's already done it twice. It's just different, that's the problem.
You're all happy about that? Okay, thank you.
So can we have a vote on it?
Yep.
Just a
Question from a governance point of view. This is not going straight to executive, it's going to consultation. Yeah. So it's for this committee to propose a change. Is that your understanding, Kieran?
Correct. This is a report that goes through members now. This evening, you've been asked to publish a report for public consultation. It's possible to remove sections of this policy in terms of its draft provision and not consult on the food hygiene ratings at this time. It may well be worthwhile progressing with a consultation as the policy is set out, given that the provisions would lift standards around food hygiene ratings, and it may be worthwhile bringing some data before the committee to make a decision on whether or not it should be kept in or disregarded. At the moment, with respect, we have a view. That view could be heeded and it could be removed from the policy as set, or you could show caution to removing sections of the policy and have a consultation and bring it before a committee for a decision with feedback from members of the community, because it's not just businesses. As with public safety measures, the primary aspect is public safety and food safety. So there is always a balance with any type of licensing. There's a balance between business and there's a balance between the community themselves. It could be worthwhile at least having the consultation with the public and responsible authorities, so that you've got a more informed view on whether to keep it in or to remove it at a later date.
Rachel, would you like to come in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think just to clarify from reading it, and Kieran will tell me if I'm wrong, it could be that we're slightly misreading it, because my understanding would be that the trigger would be where a food hygiene rating falls below 3, so 3 would be acceptable, being the rating in the middle, and it would only be 1 or 2 that triggered this. So subject to that being correct, I think there's probably less concern.
Sorry, there certainly isn't less concern. The fundamental here is that you're being inconsistent just because the thing is on wheels. And that, I think, is unfair to businesses. If you want to make the standard, if you're saying anything below a 2 or anything 2 and lower is unsafe, then you should be banning it everywhere. If it's not unsafe, then you shouldn't be. So I would like a vote on this proposal, please.
Can I just clarify one more thing? Without making any observation, because that's a matter for members, but clearly Woking Borough Council has less control over prohibiting restaurants that fall into the category of 2 and 1. So this can't simply be written into how Woking Borough Council do things unless Environmental Health want to prohibit premises. But with the street trading consents, the consents give a lot of scope for control to be had by the authority. So the element of control is possible here where perhaps it wouldn't be possible with a restaurant. That's my understanding of it anyway.
Yep.
I have questions.
Yeah. Right, we're going to vote on whether 3, which is 5 on the page 17 of the paperwork, paragraph 5, will equally apply to...
No, we're not. No.
Sorry?
Sorry, my proposal is that we suggest to executive that they remove that clause, and that the mobile street traders are treated exactly the same as the equivalent restaurant that would have the equivalent health rating or food safety rating.
That's what I was going to say.
No, you weren't. You said something different.
Sorry, I said it the other way around. Okay. Mark?
Are we in question or are we in debate? Are we in question or debate?
Sorry?
So I have a couple of questions, well, not questions, but I have concerns over removing this at this point before it goes to consultation. I think it's the wrong thing to do. I think, and I would like to, I have no issue with improving food standards and safety for all of our residents across the borough. That's what we should absolutely be doing. And this is a separate policy to our restaurants, for example. But I think, you know, whatever we do, I would prefer to leave this in, seek feedback from residents and the public and the businesses about what their views are on this, and then we can react at the end of the consultation once we have more information, rather than just the decision of the people in this room today without feedback from businesses. I have no issue with the principle of removing or suspending a street trading consent if the food standards or the food hygiene rating is so low as to cause significant concern. I just think removing this at this stage from a consultation actually doesn't send a very good message to say to people, this is what we're going to do.
Sorry, the actual proposal was that we recommend to executive.
But it's not an executive recommendation.
Yeah, but it will be when the
it
policy
won't.
goes back to executive.
No, this is a policy that's set by here, so the sovereign route from here is not.
It's not executive.
No.
Okay. In that case, I will change my amendment to say we remove that clause completely now, because I think you're in real danger of a tilted balance between two different retailer units, the only difference being whether they've got wheels or not. Now, I'm surprised it would even be legal, to be honest, and I'm very concerned that we're proposing something that sets a much higher bar and it somehow implies that something is unsafe because it has a rating of 2 or 1 or 0, which it may well be, but you're quite happy to have that in a shop because you can't do anything about it. They're going to have the health rating on the outside of the van anyway, so people can make their own decisions. They know what the health ratings mean. We've seen that before in restaurants that have got very low ratings. They do something about it because it's very effective. I'm really concerned that we've got a tilted balance here, and we've got we're trying to use this policy to implement policies that we can't implement for other things doing exactly the same. I mean, there's a kebab shop in Shinfield Road. It doesn't have wheels, so presumably it wouldn't apply to that. And it just seems completely wrong to me to have different rules depending on whether your outfit is mobile or not. I think the rules got to be consistent.
I'm going to agree slightly, well, mostly with Pauline, but a bit with Mark as well. And I go back to what I said at the beginning, which is I'm perfectly happy with the idea of trying to raise standards, but I absolutely agree with Pauline's point that saying that we expect mobile ones to be, if you like, better than restaurants seems unreasonable. Having said that, I take the point that Kieran made about this is a draft policy that we're trying to get we're consulting on. I just wonder if there's another way of doing it. The problem, from my point of view, with the draft policy is there's a statement that we're putting out saying this is what we intend to do, you know, given we get some consultation back, but this is what we think should happen. And what we're therefore saying is exactly what Pauline disagrees with and I disagree with. We're saying we think it should be different in mobile catering environments than it is in restaurants. If there is a way that we could actually consult and say, what are your views on us raising this for mobile environments, that would, I think, be more acceptable, because it's not us saying this is what we think should happen. It's us asking the question, we'd like to know what you think about it. And I think there's a different slant there. If we could find a way of doing that, it might satisfy everybody.
Typically, when a policy goes to public consultation, we would release the draft policy. But as part of the public consultation, we would ask a series of questions. So I think it would be, I have a meeting with the communications manager later this week in terms of the actual public consultation. But I think it's certainly within our gift to style a method of wording for that consultation, for the consultation questions itself. So we could bring it in terms of, so the members, you will have a report in October, which would be the draft licensing, the draft street trading policy. you would then have the results of the consultation. The results of the consultation are answers to questions. So it's certainly possible to stylise a question.
And if I just check then, so my assumption had been that we actually put out the draft policy for consultation, but you think we don't actually do that. We put out a series of questions based around it. So, and that could be phrased, and I understand as you say that, but if we're putting out the questions and still putting out the draft policy, saying that's what we think, that's still saying we think it should be different. But if the consultation is just a set of questions, that's a different issue. I don't really know how that's done, so perhaps you might clarify that again for the simpleton that's me.
The two I would imagine the two would need to be had together, because otherwise you could potentially have questions, then come back, set a policy from that. But I think in terms of what you're trying to aspire to get is you would want feedback. So I believe the points have been made very, very clear, even without a vote either way. Points have been made very, very, very clear, and that could go on to inform any debate at a later committee. But you would, as from a local government perspective, you will benefit from data, and you would benefit from representation from environmental health or public health, but also members of the public, and of course the businesses that it's impacted on. As part of the consultation, we would certainly include any of the consent holders, the existing consent holders. So I think we can certainly shape some of the questions of the views that you're trying to engage with, and then thereby you would then have data. But the two would need to go out.
So I think that's a reasonable idea to ask a question, but I think that policy then should not be in here until we've got the answer to that question. My experience of consultations, and maybe these ones are different, but my experience of consultation, you'd be lucky if you get 20 responses. So whether the responses will actually help you very much in your deliberations, I very much doubt. So I'd come back to my proposal, which is we remove that. I'd be very happy if we asked a question about it. I think that's a good idea. But we remove that clause at the moment and say, if in your consultation, something along the lines, if we wanted to increase the standard of, or the standard of hygiene in street traders above the level of restaurants, would you support it or not? I think that question is a fair question to ask. Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
To be a question rather than a statement.
But I'd still like a vote on getting that clause out of there because I just don't think it's right.
The trouble is, if you remove it from the draft policy, then go out to consultation and ask a question, and the public come back and goes, yes, actually we think it's a great idea, or the restaurant trades go, yes, mobile traders go, yes, I think that's a good idea, we'd support that. If it's removed from the draft policy consultation, you then have to go and reconsult on the policy with that clause back in. So instead of it being what is it we're saying here, a 28-day consultation, Kieran? So instead of it being that period of time, it would now take us even longer because we'd have to go and reconsult on the whole policy package again to include it as the draft policy. This isn't a normal consultation that we would do with the budget or anything else. This is here is a policy consultation, this is what it's going to say. So I think the easiest thing is if...
Sorry, Mark, that doesn't make sense. So that doesn't make sense.
Well, if you take it out of a draft policy, unless things have changed, if you take it out, here is the draft policy that we are proposing
and if you put it in
on,
and then decide to take it out, then you have to go out to consultation again.
No.
So you're changing it either way.
Sorry, you don't, because you're reacting to the consultation to say, having considered the evidence and the submissions given, the panel have deliberated and have considered that this now should be removed. If you go the other way round, you'd have to go back out and reconsult on putting it back in.
I don't see why that's the case. If you take it out, sorry. My apologies. If you take it out, but then ask the question, should we be raising it higher? Then logically that's exactly the same, just in the opposite direction. Come back to consultation. The consultation said you should raise it. You put that in the new policy. I'm a little bit with Pauline in that if we put a draft policy out saying that, it is us saying this is what we think should happen. And I'm a bit uncomfortable with that for the same reasons that Pauline was.
I think I can help with some clarity here, because it is clearly a sensitive area. But I think what's almost being debated is governance arrangements and how we inform a view. Although it wasn't expected in this same manner, that the policy itself, in terms of the consultation that's going to that's going to be distributed, the policy itself gives some scope. So at page 13 of your report pack, and it's in the green text box, it's page 5 of the policy. It suggests a 12-week consultation process. And as part of the 12-week consultation process, it suggests that if there are any significant amendments, so if there's a significant amendment for the financial effect on consent holders, a procedural effect on consent holders, or as a likely effect on the local community. And what it's saying there is that if there's an impact in any of those areas, effectively there would need to be a further consultation. It'd be sensible and slightly pragmatic to include measures along the food hygiene standards within the policy at its present time, because that shows that it's consulted upon. It's quite a lengthy consultation. It's proposed a 12-week consultation, and when it comes to before the committee in October, it gives the ability for the committee themselves to make a determination on the best steps. That could well be to remove the food hygiene ratings, or it could be a different approach to wording in terms of what's proposed there, or it could be to maintain it. But you'd certainly have the gather of the public's views, business views, and responsible authority views at that point. So it does bring us into, in terms of the governance perspective, it does bring us into the section of releasing a draft policy as it is. It's accepted we can draw out, in terms of the consultation, questions around the food hygiene ratings and what the views are there, and then that means that the consultation wouldn't necessarily have to be repeated following.
How many responses do you expect to get?
Sorry, Pauline, didn't hear you.
I was asking how many responses they expected to get to this consultation.
I'm not sure. I couldn't say.
Last time you consulted, how many responses did you get?
If 20 responses would be provided, that could be a healthy figure.
So I think I've still got a proposal to remove that on the table. I don't know if Stephen's still happy to second it or whether he's changed his mind.
I was going to say, it looks to me as if you're getting a two-tier system for hygiene. Hygiene should be across the board. It should be exactly the same in restaurants and in mobile food places. I think if we're differentiating, we're actually saying that restaurants can get away with murder, but mobile food operatives can't. I don't think anybody should. Their food hygiene rates should be simple, and it should be not two-tier in anything. Sorry.
Kay, I think we all agree with you in that, but as Rachel explained, only one of them is in our gift. Yes. We can't change the other one.
But that means it's two-tier. That's the whole point.
Well, it may mean it's two-tier, but we can't change both tiers. We don't have the power to do so.
Both tiers alone.
Actually, it was new to me as well, that we can't manage the restaurants, but we can manage mobile, street. So that's seemed like a strange thing to me as well in the first place. But obviously there are some reasons why that happens. But I think we all agree that this needs to happen. There needs to be consistency. Can we not actually make this policy so at least it is consistent with the restaurants? At least that we know that we're not being discriminatory here, right? In this policy, okay, if we can't raise the bar of the restaurants, can we not actually make this policy consistent with the restaurant policy? So make sure that we are not actually discriminating. That the main point I think everybody is saying is we should not be discriminating whether you're a street vendor or whether you're a restaurant. The other thing is that safety needs to be at the highest level. We're talking about, this is people's lives here we're talking about.
We all understand that.
So can we actually make this consistent, this policy consistent with the restaurants?
I think we all understand that. It's how we achieve it, Shahid, that is the issue. To reply to that, or shall we ask Rachel for some advice?
No. I think it's so. I think discriminatory is quite a harsh term, and actually it's probably incorrect language to use. Discriminatory comes around hate crime or Equalities Act. What we're discussing here is public policy and local governance. So there isn't the scope to have that greater deal of regulation on businesses in terms of maybe late night refreshment and so on. This late night refreshment through premises licence. But there isn't the ability to have greater level of regulatory control on restaurants as it is now. Within local government, within local policy, you do have the ability to shape your own policy, or Wokingham Borough Council's own policy around street trading. So that is within the committee's gift. At the moment, we've, in terms of officers, from an officer's perspective, we've taken feedback from some subcommittee hearings around what checks we should be doing as a licensing authority. They're coming around DBS checks and coming around right to work checks. Some of those checks aren't carried out by restaurants. So again, they're a level of regulatory control, which isn't discriminatory, but is putting higher standards in place. The policy itself has been reviewed by other local authorities in terms of what their approach to street trading is, and that's what's informed our own policy. So we're taking a revised policy, so we've gone from a policy which doesn't have food hygiene rating restrictions in place. It doesn't have the level 2 hygiene certificate standards. It doesn't have a DBS standards, and it doesn't have right to work standards. So across the board, there's a review of all revised aspects of street trading which other local authorities are currently regulating, and they're regulating through a street trading policy. I think it probably is quite important to provide more data to this. At the moment, we've got an exercise where officers have reviewed previous subcommittee decisions which members have been part of and shaped our own policy, and then we've also looked at other local authorities and looked for their best practice. But what would be useful to have is feedback from the local community to shape views. And I think my own thoughts at the moment is that we're missing some of that feedback, and that feedback would help shape views.
Thank you. Maybe we could go back to Rachel. She could answer this, because it is something that Pauline raised right at the beginning. Is this actually enforceable? None of us are saying that we don't want this, but you know, the reality is yes, we would like this, but is this actually enforceable? So would we then have the issue that we would potentially have street traders would appeal these decisions as an authority, and then they, you know, get legal advice, and how can we actually enforce this when we've got restaurants that are allowed to operate? And we know all behind this, but I'm just saying, are we creating a huge kind of issue here for the council that we can't actually enforce? We know, I don't disagree with any of the reasons behind it, but we know what it's like when we come to appeals. People will come in and they will challenge this. So I really do think, is this actually, this policy that you're writing, is it ever going to be legally enforceable?
Yeah, it'd certainly be enforceable. The regime's a consent regime, so it's not It's not a licensing regime, it's a consent regime. The method of revoking a street trading consent is by way of a subcommittee hearing, and there's no right of appeal other than through judicial review. In terms of the enforcement aspects, they're monitored through licensing officers and environmental health officers, or through the consultation responses that come through. So it's certainly, it's absolutely an enforceable area, and it's shaped by policy. So whatever conditions that are prescribed, however this policy is shaped, that would then become enforceable. And licensing officers and environmental health officers would then be tasked to make sure there's compliance with that policy, in exactly the same way that we have our taxi licensing policy, and we have taxi drivers that have their licenses revoked because of convictions and so on. It'd be the exact same approach.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been said, I think we're all agreeing that raising standards across the borough is something we'd all aspire to. I do stick with my concern that putting this in there gives a steer in this way, and anyone who agrees with it isn't going to comment. Anyone who disagrees might. So therefore, you know, you might not get the balance of opinions back that you're hoping for. I do wonder if we take it out, we could ask a question around, would people support the council taking future steps to try and increase or improve the hygiene standards by raising the bar, or there'll be wording you can come up with around that. But I think also what I'd like to see, if we can have it at some point in a future meeting, is a briefing to understand the difference between this and restaurants and other food outlets in a broader context. Because I think that if we are trying to raise standards, then we should be trying to do that across the piece. And I have no problem with that. I do have a problem for all the reasons that Pauline's saying, where we have two different levels of standard. So I am still supportive of removing this at this stage, but asking the question, and I think we'll get a better response rate then from people, and particularly the public, which is what we want to hear from. Because if they think that we're going to put this through with that higher level in the first place, people won't comment on it. That's my fear. And so therefore we want to invite responses back upon the question across all food outlets, not just street trading ones. We know we may be limited in what we can do with some of those in terms of restaurants and other outlets, but then maybe that's where we can challenge the government or something, so that we can have control and powers to do that locally. And why don't we look to create a better environment and use this as a test case maybe for the country? I don't know.
I'm inclined to support Stephen actually on this particular point. I think one thing we need to bear in mind is that it's the same people, the owners, who are, one case they'll be running a restaurant, and then they'll also have a street trading as well. So what they will be doing is applying one set of standards for the restaurant, but another set of standards for the street vendors. So that doesn't sit right as well from that point of view. But still, I go back to the point. I think my point which I made has been missed here is okay, we understand, we recognize we cannot change the restaurant policy, but can we not actually make this consistent with the restaurant policy? That's the point I was making earlier on. I think that hasn't been particularly addressed yet. If it's not discriminatory, is probably a harsh word to use, but let's be consistent with the same policy as a restaurant. I think that will probably,
One of the problems is, Shahid, we can't ask a question where we have no control, because if 100% of the respondents said yes, we can do absolutely nothing about it. We can campaign, we can ask government, but we still cannot do anything about it. So we're setting an expectation in the public. I think it is better to change that into a question rather than a statement, and get opinions, and maybe put it in a separate section of the consultation and see what we get back.
I think we've got a proposal and a seconder on the table here. which is to remove that clause and add a question that asks whether people in general would be supportive of a higher level of hygiene requirement for mobile traders versus restaurants, and see what the response is. I would like to put this to the vote, please.
Can you give us the wording?
I think that was the wording.
I know, but no one's writing it down.
Well, maybe it... So my proposal is, for the 5th time, that we should remove this clause that suggests we have a requirement to essentially remove licences for anybody who has a rating lower than 3, and replace it with a question as to whether the public or whoever the consultees would support a higher level of hygiene rating requirement for mobile traders versus restaurants, and then we'll see what the feedback actually is. Is that okay, Stephen? Yeah, right, thank you.
Can we just check with Kieran, is that possible? I just want to make sure. Well, I don't really know either, but I just thought I'd ask.
It is possible, but I am slightly struggling with the views on there being two different regimes. There's not two different regimes. There is only your regulatory control over street trading. And as part of street trading, you have your consent streets and licensed streets and unprohibited streets. And then you have potential measures around where you may give a consent. So that there's not a two-tier approach. That doesn't exist. There's not a discriminatory...
I might interrupt on that, because I think from the population's point of view, there would be a two-tier system. You're correct from the council's point of view, because we only have control. But we all have residents here. They would see that as two food retailers with different systems. They would see it as a two-tier system, I think. You're correct from the council's point of view.
Can,
but from
can I
them,
stop
I
you?
think they'd see it
Chris has
differently.
indicated that he wanted to come in. Chris?
Yeah, sorry. Excuse me. So from asking a question point of view, if you ask the question and nobody is opposed to it, you are less likely to get an answer. Whereas if something is in there that people actually, we clearly strongly object to this. You know, a lot of people around this table object to it. If this went out in its current format, we would feed back, or a lot of people here would feed back and go, actually, we really don't like this, we don't want it in. If you put it as a question separately, because it doesn't sound like it's something that's going to go in, the chances of getting that feedback against it then diminish. People will just go, well, they're not planning to do it anyway. Maybe there's something that they're going to do in the future. We're not going to say anything either way at this stage, and you perhaps limit your chances of getting a negative response. We are part of that feedback cycle, and if we move to give feedback to that process to say that we are opposed to it, we are already part of that voice that says this isn't going to happen, and this document is going to come back before us again before it is finalised. Is that correct? And at that stage, we can just remove it.
Sorry, can I once again ask for this to be put to the vote, please? I think everybody understands all the ramifications of it. We've been through it about 6 times. We've heard the same thing over and over again. I've made a proposal. I've got a seconder. Could we please have a vote?
Okay, we'll put it to the vote now. Pauline's given you the wording. Would those who agree with Pauline please raise their hands now?
Can you just repeat your proposal?
In summary...
You seconded it.
In summary, no, he didn't. Stephen seconded it. In summary, the proposal is that we remove this clause that... The one that requires a rating of 3 or above to retain your street licence. Sorry? Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. So we remove paragraph 5 in page 17, but have a question in the consultation that says, do you think we should have a higher level of hygiene requirement for street traders than we do for restaurants? That's the summary. You can fancy around with the words as much as you like, but that's the summary. So, in favour?
Those in favour show their hands, please. Those against? It's carried. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, we picked up on that because I was going through my list of suggested changes. If I can carry on, please. If I can refer you, please, to page 22 in section 14. And it's paragraph 2. It says in the application process, the name of the business must not be the same as or be similar to that of an existing static retail business or another street trader. I would suggest that we add within Wokingham Borough to the end of that. We won't possibly know if there's other kebab shops trading similarly outside of Wokingham Borough with a similar name. And I don't think that matters if they're separate businesses. But I just think, again, it's for clarity, so that there's no issues around that or people objecting that there's one in another part of the country with a similar name. If we can then go on to page 23, please. Again, section 14, paragraph 3, you've got all the bullets there. And I'm just thinking that we should add a section here about the proposed method of disposing of any waste generated by the business, including copies of contracts, etc. Waste transfer certificates will need to be kept and provided during inspection, so that we've got a clear visibility for the officers as to how the company, trade or whatever is going to get rid of the waste that they generate, because we've had some concerns around this where they may be wanting to use other people's bins, council-owned bins, and not paying properly for it. But also we need to know from a waste transfer element that it's being disposed of properly, because there are regulations around that. Again, I'm sorry to be pedantic, but it's just trying to be really belts and braces on it. I'm nearly through, only 2 more bits. If we can go to page 29. And this is just a typo. If you look at section 3 where it's headed drugs, where an applicant, and it says as a conviction, it should just be an H for has, please. It's just a typo. It's terribly minor, I know. And then final bit from me, page 34. And looking at Appendix B, paragraph 19 or 20. Again, it's just an issue about waste. Both 19 and 20 talk about waste. And I'm just suggesting the consent holder must have arrangements in place for the appropriate and safe disposal of all waste generated by the business and keep waste transfer certificates that can be inspected. This is page, sorry, page 34, but at the top of it, it's if you look at, you've got paragraphs 19 on the page before and then paragraph 20, so it sort of spans the two. Again, it's just a point around waste has to be disposed of appropriately, and waste transfer certificates could be added in there. Just so there's, again, a belt and braces around. We are expecting the consent holder to have proper measures in place to deal with all of this stuff. That is it for my suggestions. Thank you.
Did you mention the
Do we need to vote on
Sorry, does anyone want to make a comment on the changes Stephen would like to make? Yeah. You all happy about them?
Just one question for clarification on that. You said,
Rob.
I think you were talking, you were talking about you wanted them to have the documents available, I think you said. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you mean at the premises all the time?
Well, what I was saying was that the waste transfer certificates need to be held and they should be available for inspection. They may not be at the premises.
Well, that's what I meant, is if they're held for inspection in the business premises or wherever they're at their home, if they're a sole trader or something like that, if we're always saying is they should be maintained, that's fine. If we expect them to be maintained for immediate inspection, that would mean they would have to be on the premises all the time, and I don't think that's, I think that'd be a bit too much.
Yeah, I said available for inspection. It's not immediate. But what I'm thinking is then that if there is an inspection and they don't have them on the premises, there should be a reasonable time limit, in which case they can present them to the inspector so they can complete their inspection. So, no, you wouldn't necessarily have folders of stuff in a van, I get that. But I'm just thinking that having evidence of this, having it properly documented is important, and the inspector needs to have sight of it at some point.
I think that was a sensible exchange to at least provide officers with a time frame. It is an area that's checked, it's regulated, and there are fixed penalty notices that are issued from our ASB team around it. So to assist officers with their inspections, I think that would be a sensible exchange. So we include a condition on that for the consent, but with a time frame for its understood.
Thank you for that. Could I suggest within 5 working days as a time frame? I think that's perfectly adequate.
It's just a point of clarification on, oh God, where is it? Top of page 36, or green page 28. Such a certificate may only be issued by a person approved by the council or registered gas installers, Corgi. Is that not now gas safe? I mean, I think it's fairly obvious what it says, but Corgi doesn't. Corgi was replaced in 2009, 10, 11, something like that. Just for, we know what it says, but just to tidy it up.
Yeah, I have a question about DBS checks. First question is that, is this individual responsibility or is it responsibility of owner of that business? And second one is that who is going to pay for it? For example, if it's owner's responsibility, then will owner pay, or will he or she is charging that money from employees? And third one is that what is duration of that DBS check? Like, for example, in care homes, in some care homes it's renewed after every 6 months, in some care homes it's renewed after 1 year.
Mark, can you turn your microphone?
Oh, sorry.
So DBS checks, if we just bring the policy up to answer that for you. So that's page 26 of the report, and it's in green, page 18, paragraph 18, DBS checks. So you've asked the frequency of DBS checks and the duty of who's supplying the DBS checks and the cost. That's correct, isn't it? The DBS checks that are proposed are the basic DBS service checks, which are around £20 odd per DBS check, and they would be included as part of the application process. So when a consent form is supplied, there's an application, and then there's a series of other documentation that would correspond with that application to make a valid application. We ask for gas safety certificates and so on, and proof of planning permission, etc., etc. This would be to add a DBS check, a basic DBS check. The cost of the basic DBS check would be on that of the applicant. Applicants, depending on the nature of their business, the business model, will either just be sole traders and will be themselves, or they may employ street trading assistants. But whoever is involved with that particular application, be it the consent holder or the consent holder and the street trading assistants, they would need to supply a basic DBS check with their application at a cost to the applicant. The frequency of DBS checks would fall in line with the street trading consent. Street trading consent can last up to 12 months, and generally the majority of consents will obviously be 12-month consents. So they would be on each application rather than through an update service or asked for an extra DBS along the way.
It's an interesting question about DBS checks. If people have previously worked somewhere else, are you going to ask for a foreign DBS check for the period that they've worked somewhere else? So if you're going back, say, 5 years on a DBS, which I think's normal from the ones I've seen, if they've worked for any period abroad, during that 5 years, are you asking for a foreign DBS or are you just asking for the UK one?
We do have something similar in our taxi licensing policy where they've had a period of time abroad. That isn't included within this policy. We're looking at just introducing the basic checks rather than a period of time abroad. It's something that we could potentially add, but it's not included within the policy as it stands.
If it's inconsistent with the taxi policy, I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be the same personally. I mean, I've done quite a lot of international recruitment, and if you've got a significant period of work abroad, we always got DBS checks from abroad. It does give you some problems because they're not always in English, but I'm just interested to know why it's inconsistent.
I suppose it would be sensible. I was just looking to bring up our own taxi licensing policy, but I'm sure I can take that review out of time and include it and look for similar wording.
Stephen.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I was pleased to see this was being introduced. I hadn't considered the element of where they might have worked abroad before, so I think that's an interesting thing to bring into the equation. My only initial thoughts on this really are that the risks are slightly different in that here you are being presented with food and there's a very limited time interaction. And we've got other methods with the training certification and the food hygiene and stuff. There's other measures in place to protect against the food risks. Whereas if you're in a taxi with somebody, there are different risks because of the being in close proximity to them and also with them being in control of where you go and so on. So I could see there being a difference, but I just wonder whether officers want to just look at that, and as has been suggested, I think, by Pauline, to see whether this would be something sensible to bring in at some point.
Do we know what other authorities do about the foreign DBS check?
I don't think they have foreign DBS checks, which is probably leads us. It's not something I've seen in the other councils' policies.
The only reason I thought about them is it's a requirement for an airside pass. So, you know, you need to have a full period of lack of convictions. And if you happen to have been living abroad for 4 out of the 5 years previously, then you can't really do that without having a foreign DBS check.
There is quite rightly a difference, but that's been alluded to. There is quite rightly a difference between our taxi licensing. Our taxi licensing checks are enhanced DBS checks, and they're obviously vetted slightly more strictly because of their contact with vulnerable passengers and children. And they're a specific other workforce on those categories. This would be a DBS checks. There are, however, some similarities between the convictions policy that we've put forward in terms of the DBS check. So for the convictions policy in the street trading consents policy here, we've taken the similar time frames from our taxi licensing policy. So of the convictions that are in there in terms of drugs or violence, we've put the same standard. But really that's about as far as the parallels have been drawn to taxi licensing.
Rob.
Thanks very much, Kieran. I'm just concerned slightly about the timing of something like this, and forgive me if I might have misunderstood that, but as I understood it, we will be applicants will be getting a license for themselves and possibly for a street trading assistant or assistants. The nature of some of these types of businesses implies to me that if they have a sickness, an illness, somebody dies, whatever, they're going to need to replace that person quite soon. They're unlikely to have a stack of these guys waiting. You've got potentially a 4-week period whilst you're waiting to try and get a basic DBS. I've no idea how long it would take to get a foreign one. And it would concern me slightly that we might be putting the traders in a position where they cannot trade because they've lost their current street trading assistant and we're stopping them doing it because they have to wait for a DBS check for another assistant. If that's the way it works, I think that might be a problem, and maybe we have to do something that says, or provide a method whereby they can have somebody here whilst that DBS check is pending, just to stop them having to cease trading whilst we're waiting for that.
I can't help but accept your view there. I think it's obviously pragmatic. There's certainly an element where we can and where the local authority can do so in terms of introducing DBS checks, but I think I would accept your view. If I could take some time with our legal officer to cover it with a paragraph for something sensible and bring that back to members before we go to consultation.
Shahid.
I think we need to be maybe sensible here in terms of approach here. The level of risk, I think Rob mentioned, I agree with both, it's different risk altogether as a street vendor providing food and the risk and the taxi drivers. So, and as Kiran said, this is enhanced, which is a much more higher level of check for taxi drivers rather than the basic one, right? Another thing is that, it's bad enough getting a DBS checked here in the UK, which it probably takes about 4 weeks anyway. And I'm in the care business and I know how long I have to go through, to get the DBS for my employees, right? But to get a foreign one, that could even be much, much longer period of time. So we are actually making it much more difficult, because I know some people who've had them, the foreign ones, and it's not an easy one to do because there's a lot of police checks and they have to go and get these signatures from 10 different places. From their localities, and it could be huge cost to them and probably deter them from actually doing the business as well. But then the question is that worth it? Of course, we need to make sure that our safety and measures are there, but at the same time, we need to be reasonable in our approach as a council, that on one side, we're not actually putting our public at risk, but at the same time, we're not making the job very difficult for the vendors as well. So I'm not sure. We need to think about this.
Okay. Rebecca.
Some sensible wording about the DBS check until it comes through that person is supervised and they're not working on their own. That's the sensible way to do it, is what they do in areas where, because the reality is you are in a position of trust if you're serving, you do have access to maybe vulnerable adults, vulnerable children, anybody, but it is just sensible that you could potentially put that in the wording that, and if somebody could be allowed to work but they have to be supervised until that time, until their DBS comes through, and then that means there isn't a delay. And that's what they have done in schools and youth groups and various things locally, and I'm aware of.
Thank you, Rebecca. Mark.
I was going to say pretty much the same thing, and I think the only other point is we're not saying that you can go and apply for an enhanced DBS check or the local equivalent if one exists in every country, but what we're saying is if you have one, I think, and there is a certain period of time since that was issued, then that would probably be accepted. I think that's what people say. I think the thing is also with the DBS checks is a basic DBS check, and I've just, with a charity I work with, I think we processed about 10 in one day. We submitted them at 9 o'clock in the morning. They were all approved by 9:30. They were all approved by 9:30, because all it is does this person have a criminal conviction? It's not an enhanced check, so we must be very careful not to confuse an enhanced DBS check, which we would absolutely have for all of our license. Anyone that's in close proximity to a vulnerable adult, it's the basic test of a taxi of would I feel safe in the knowledge that a loved one was in the car with that person, from a basic DBS check on do I have a criminal record. I think I did mine for my new job as part of the ID check. It took 18 minutes from submission to approval. Yeah, they're virtually instant because it's all electronic. Yeah, so I think with the clause added in about unsupervised until that comes through, I think this is about protecting our residents. This is about removing other issues and removing other barriers. A basic DBS check should be a UK DBS check. They are pretty much instantaneous because of the way the electronic systems work. So I think suitable words that Rebecca suggested, and that's a very sensible way forward.
I have seen times when there has been quite a backlog. There was quite a backlog after COVID when everybody's trying to get them at the same time. So I think, as Rebecca said, sensible precaution to allow a way out if there is a problem with the processing, but there shouldn't be.
It's It's the enhanced ones that still take
time.
ages because they go through multiple police authorities and multiple bodies. But the basic ones now, typically the Met is the worst in the country for processing times, and typically they are within, they quote within a couple of days, but typically a Met police check for a basic DBS is normally same day.
That sounds quite sensible to me. And I think if you're happy, Kieran, to go down that route, I think more importantly, the right to work check should be done.
Yes. To be fair, DBS checks, it belongs to the individual. So you can use it multiple times.
Yeah, but your right to work shows in your passport.
Absolutely, that's the first thing.
Yeah. Right. Okay, Majid.
Yeah, I have a slightly different question. When I read this page 4 from residents' point of view, I see many attractions here. But when I read it, suppose I am going to start my business here. When I read from that point of view, I think there are new fees here which are not earlier there. So these are being introduced. And if I compare it with other boroughs, like for example Reading Borough or Bracknell or some other area, so have you given any consideration what will be impact on local business? Will it encourage local business or will it discourage local business after these changes?
There's a balance. There's clearly a balance, a regulatory balance, and I think that's well acknowledged by the committee that's present. The DBS would be a cost to the applicant. The cost is relatively low. It's around £20 odd. It's for the committee to make a decision on whether to put a DBS in or consult on it, but the cost there is very low by the trade-offs.
It's not only about cost. I am talking about will it make process more complicated because it will take more time. Like for example, in other boroughs, if these things are not there, it's pretty straight there. Like they can come, they can do few things and then they can start their business. But here, DBS, then those work checks, I'm not opposing those, I'm just like asking you, it will take much more time. So a business owner will think, should I spend time here or waste my time, apologize for my word, waste my time here or should I go to some other area? That's what I'm asking. Like that economic factor is there, but is it making a process more complicated and more difficult or not?
No.
Well, there's obviously an impact on the process and cost. A party would need to apply to the DBS website and get their certificate back. In terms of providing a certificate and the cost, again, that's quite low, low as an ask, but it is still an ask. So it's for yourselves to make your decisions on your own policy there. But there are quite considerable strengths in terms of providing DBS checks, and against other authorities, this has long been a prerequisite to applications.
Shahid.
I think just a point to make a point regarding right to work. My understanding is, Karen, you correct me if I'm wrong, is that is a legal requirement from the Home Office. It has to be done. There is no choice, whether you can or you can't. So it has to be done. So because if you haven't got the right to work in this UK, then you forget about anything else. You shouldn't be here anyway, and not to do business either. So.
Absolutely.
Correct. In a view, it would therefore place a slight onus on the licensing authority to maintain those checks as well. But the licensing authority are already completing right to work checks. That being said, that there will be reviews of licensed premises where premises may even be revoked for not complying. But it does. It would put an onus on the applicant to provide documentation. It would put an onus on the licensing officer to check. But the reality is that that's what's happening now. So.
Well, you both go on, Bassett, you were first.
The way I see, I think these additional measures, we are trying to raise the bar. This will protect business owners as well. Means we have seen incidents in the recent years where business owners hired people and they were not aware about their activities which were outside of their job premises. So it may look complicated, but the way I say it would have direct benefit to the business owner, and as Karen mentioned, the cost is very low, but the benefit to them would be very high to run the business smoothly.
Sorry, can I just come back on this same point as well? Because I've seen this in many businesses. Yes, you get a license, for example, you get the right to work. But would that extend to people, the employee as well? Probably to employee as well? Because I know some people who haven't got right to work, they're being exploited by the employers as well. They're employing them, they're paying them below minimum wage, and there doesn't seem to be any check on any of those businesses at all. So I'm just thinking that, once you get a license, okay, you do the business, and is there any checks council does in terms of, or is that just a home office job to maybe sometimes you have raids and they find people and then that's a different issue. But do you see what I'm saying? There's a lot of abuse happening.
It's up to the employer to check the right to work in all circumstances of their employees, yes. And I agree there are some that don't and just ignore it and hopefully they get their comeuppance eventually.
Yeah, I would say that where you've stepped into modern day slavery methods, and ultimately the right to work provides a safeguard from that. So, as a committee with this policy, you're putting a higher expectation on the licensing authority themselves in terms of officers, but also on the business. And if it opens up any areas or safeguards against those practices, then that's the intention of the policy.
Can I, hopefully we've talked about that a fair bit, can I move on to the guidelines relating to the relevance of convictions, as it seems that it's part of this discussion? In that we have on the guidelines, we're looking at a period of time after the convictions have been, or the last conviction, if you like. Particular ones that came to my mind were those relating to dishonesty and to drugs. We have a 7-year period of a waiting period after the conviction or the date of release before they'd be allowed to work in this environment. 7 years seems like a long time when, as a society, we're supposed to be trying to rehabilitate and get these people back into a productive part of society. So effectively banning them from doing this type of work for 7 years seems quite a long time. And relating to the drugs side of it, if they've been convicted for dealing in drugs, I'm absolutely fine for them to be locked out of this for as long as you like. But for somebody who's just been using, and we're basically talking about 10 years from the last period of imprisonment or conviction as a user, considering how many people are in our society, whether it's legal or illegal, they are using drugs, I think that's a bit of a long period. I wonder if we could look at that duration again.
The convictions policy, where we have dishonesty, drugs, and other offences, effectively that's almost like for like with our taxi licensing. I think my thoughts would be that it would be useful to potentially bring this out in the consultation with consultation questions around the number of years. I think we've already touched upon there is a difference between taxi licensing and this. I would propose to bring that forward in terms of leave the years as they are in the policy, but bring that forward in terms of the actual questioning, so you get some feedback on each avenue.
Pauline?
I just wondered if they were meant to be aligned with the length of time before spent convictions. So if you look at the spent convictions for drug offences, sentences of less than 1 year become spent in 1 year, sentences between 1 and 4 years become spent in 4 years, and sentences of more than 4 years, which is probably your drug dealers, become spent after 7 years. So you might well want to align it with the spent conviction regulation and make it a lot simpler, and then if somebody changes that, it changes automatically.
Sorry, that sounds quite a sensible concept.
I can't see any dissent to that. Okay, thank you. Have we now come to the end of the discussion and we can vote on the policy with amendments that have gone through?
Sorry, can I just clarify that certainly Paul and I and the rest of us seem to be in agreement, but I'm not quite sure, Kieran, does that imply that we're still going to leave that as is here? But, so how do we go back and review trying to do something like Pauline said as part of this? I'm not quite sure I understand how that might work in the process.
Well, we have an area around sexual indecency offences. I would need to find out whether or not they become spent convictions or not. I would imagine any committee would want to not grant a consent in that way. We've touched upon dishonesty, violence and drugs. And then there's also motoring convictions. Yes. So I would, to take the spent convictions. It does say that. Yeah, I spotted it just at the same time. So perhaps if you want to take a discussion on that, I'm going to take this as, for dishonesty, violence and drugs, we deal with that as spent convictions. And then for sexual indecency offences, that's maintained as it's read.
Can I help with that?
Go on.
Sorry, I've just looked.
One of you needs to just...
I'm sorry.
I've just looked it up. So it says some custodial sentences, such as life sentences and sentences of over 4 years for sexual offences, can never become spent. So the more minor things can become spent, but the significant ones cannot. So I don't know if it helps.
Could we just have some that follows? Could we just have some discussion on motoring offences? So that paragraph reads, in most cases, motoring offences are unlikely to be relevant when deciding any applicant for a street trading consent is a suitable person. However, there may be instances where the nature of street trading is such that it, by its very nature, is required to drive. For example, ice cream sellers who have mobile street trading consents. In those cases, an applicant for a street trading consent would be expected to show a period, usually 7 years, of any such offences from the date of conviction or date of release, a period of imprisonment. That matches the 7 years period, which relates to like no insurance and so on. That does match our taxi licensing policy. Do we have a view on that area?
So you're talking about speeding?
No.
More serious offences.
Okay. So what sort of offences?
Stephen?
So I'm not answering your question, Paul, in terms of what sort of offences, but I think what you're talking about there is more serious offences than just speeding, so where you've caused an accident, an injury or something to somebody is my suspicion. Kieran will probably answer that one. I think just to be clarify what I think we're talking about here is that for sections 1, 2, 3 and 4, which is dishonesty, violence, drugs and sexual and indecency offences, that we are just taking out the time limits, but we're just aligning that to the spent convictions guidance. And then motoring we would keep as is. Is that what we are agreeing to? Because I think that's what I was hearing, and I'm quite happy to second that or propose it indeed if we haven't got that already. Because it seems to me to be aligning that would be sensible, and if they then change, as Pauline said, then it would automatically update the policy to keep us in step with it, and we haven't got to worry about being out of kilter.
Rob?
I think that's pretty much a good summary of roughly what we agreed, with the exception of the motoring bit. The motoring bit, I think I'm okay with a certain level of, how can I put this, motoring offences not being hugely relevant, even if somebody has been convicted of something and then driving an ice cream truck. I doubt if they're going to be going ram raiding or something with it. 7 years again seems quite a long time, and I don't know whether there is a concept of spent convictions or not. If there is, then fine, we should align it with that. If there isn't, then 7 years again seems like an awfully long time to ban somebody after they've had some motoring offence. I know we're not talking about speeding, but we are talking about more serious ones. Still, 7 years does seem like a long time. Pauline, you frantically by any chance looking up whether there are spent convictions for motoring? I was hoping she'd find the answer before I'd finished talking. Okay, so we could do spent convictions for that as well, and then fine, we're all happy. Thank you.
So just to read it out, endorsements for road traffic offences are spent after 5 years or 2.5 years if you're under 18. If a ban lasts less than 5 years, it becomes spent 5 years after the ban was imposed. If it lasts more than 5 years, it becomes spent on the day the ban ends.
Thank you, Pauline.
I don't think there are any other areas of the policy.
No, Stephen?
Yeah, so can I just amend my proposal then, that we just align all these sections to the spent convictions, was it? I think that was the terminology, across all 5 areas, and I think we are then done, aren't we? If we can maybe, do we need to vote on that, or are we just going to agree it verbally?
Can we have a quick show of hands on that? That's unanimous. Can we just ask Rachel if we've gone outside of what we can and can't do? Rachel, please.
Hello. No, I don't think you've gone outside what you can and can't do. I think it would be possibly helpful to have the proposal seconded. Are you talking in terms of how that decision was just made, or what's being proposed?
Well, both really.
So what's being proposed is entirely a matter for you, and it's framing how this will look going into consultation. Clearly, no one can predict what will be thrown up in the consultation. So I don't see an issue with that at all. In terms of how the decision's just been made, it may have been helpful just to get a seconder on what was being proposed and then go to the show of hands, just so we can be watertight about procedure, even if it is unanimously agreed.
Thank you. Pauline seconded it. All in favour? Yeah, thank you. You know, I thought this would be a quick meeting. Are we now happy that we've gone...
Can I, Chair, just for thoroughness, because it has been quite a thorough policy, I think in reviewing the report and the policy, I think the only 2 areas that could be left for discussion are around the use of identification plates, which would be potentially a new measure, or at least to consult on identification plates. So that's at page 26. And there's also a request for definition around the use of a household. So, which is trading on private land. We're aware within the Borough of Wokingham that people will use their households as trading pitches. In terms of the legislation, even if it's privately owned land, and even if that is a household, so even if it's a household, a street trading consent would still be required, even if it was on a household's drive. We're aware that occasionally some householders will use their drive to sell Christmas trees. We've put forward that it would be sensible for that not to be classed as as regulated in terms of the policy. I don't know if anyone has a shared view on that, but we're looking for clarification around that. And then also, for the sake of completeness, the policy is looking to introduce identification plates.
Right, Mark.
I've got no real issue with identification plates because people have to display their consents already. I'm just a little worried that it's overly cumbersome in terms of it's something else that we'll then have to back into the fees and charges schedule, because what's the cost of a plate, cost of replacement plate, etc. So I think from my perspective, I would just, you know, leave it in and see what people think, and it can then be removed later on when we get consultation responses back. But there are other downstream changes into fees and charges which will then need to be looked at for, you know, the cost of all of these things and examples of what it looks like. I know I've been through this with licenses with taxis before, where you want to change the signage that goes on the side of a car. I'm concerned, slightly worried about the household element. It's not just Christmas trees, that what we're not doing is put in place something bureaucratic, that there aren't other things that we haven't considered. And I think, for example, of it's slightly different in Twickenham with rugby traffic, with houses and people's front gardens being used for, charities selling barbecues for fundraising. For Duke of Edinburgh was one of them, and there was another one for a scout group doing an expedition. I think we just need to be careful. So again, on the basis of this, we should just be asking for people's views. I would say leave it in, see what people think, and then that can come out if that's considered excessive. Christmas trees is one of them, but there are other people doing home businesses or home things that are within the curtilage of their own property. And I think there are many other examples of councils that have taken a slightly wider remit than just Christmas trees. But I think for the basis of consultation, there's a principle that says some things won't require a street trading license if you're in your own home, some things will. What do you think? And I think that's maybe some of the verbiage or the wordage that goes in the consultation document. But I think for the basis of it, leave it in, see what people say, and then we can discuss it when it comes back for adoption. And I think it's the same thing with the plates as well. They have to display their consent state, their certificates already. I leave it in, see what people say, and then we'll just need to figure out what the downstream changes are for including that into the schedule of fees and charges, and whether that goes in for this year or for next year, because otherwise we're saying free this year, included in a licence. When this kicks in, is this from next April when the next fees and charges comes in? There's a number of other issues, but at the moment they have to display a street trading consent now, and I think I'm a little worried that what we're trying to do, and I completely agree that we're trying to make this easier and better and safer for all of our residents, but I also think we need to make sure that we're not becoming overly bureaucratic or overly burdensome, either for officers' time in the amount of checks and things that they have to do, or for our businesses that are trying to set up. So I just want to make sure we've got that balance of protecting residents, but also not putting too much burdensome bureaucracy, etc., on either officers or small businesses as a barrier to entry.
Rob?
One of my comments was very similar to that in terms of the identification plates. Personally, I'm not quite sure whether we gain a great deal from that, given that, exactly as Mark said, they've already got to display effectively the same sort of information. But I'm not fussed about leaving it in or not. I'm not sure why we want it, but I'm not going to kick up a fuss about it. As far as the households are concerned, I'm a bit more worried about that, because I've been certainly somewhere I lived before where someone was making quite a nice living, basically doing motor car trading from his front garden. Now, Christmas trees is one thing because, for a start, it's ephemeral, if you like. It's there and it's gone in 3 weeks. Dealing in other things could be permanent and could be a bit of a problem. I'm not sure whether that would be covered under some other legislation, but if it's not, then I'd be nervous in saying that we don't license trading from somebody's household, because something like that would be a problem.
Stephen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I maybe was simplifying it in my head. I was thinking the identification plate was a good idea, but I was thinking it might just be something as simple as an A4 sheet laminated and just sort of on a wall, rather than a sort of a metal plate or something, which might cost a lot more money. Sorry? That's pretty much what they've already got. Yeah, so that's I just thinking it could be fairly straightforward and simple, and saying that could be cleaned and replaced very easily. So I think that I was fine with that. In return of the household thing, I just wonder whether, and maybe not for this, but for a future discussion, we just put a number of days and a calendar year limit as to how often they could sort of do this at the premises, because that would certainly sort of stop things being used permanently. But something like for no more than 45 calendar days in any one calendar year or something. So they've got an opportunity to do stuff, but it's not creating a small business that's going to run on forever without being properly licensed. But just a thought. But I think maybe we can discuss that another time.
Can I ask a question? How does this overlap with planning requirements? Because you need planning permission, I think, to run a business from your house. Yeah. So are we duplicating in, you know, where does street trading finish and what is street trading? You know, where does it finish and planning permission start? Because I thought the curtilage of the property was where planning permission started, but I'm not sure.
There's often a parallel between licensing and planning. But if an authorisation is required from planning permission, then the business owner will need to obtain planning permission and have planning enforcement. As part of our street trading consents policy, we do ask for planning permission where it's required. And quite often, in some subcommittees that I've attended where planning permission has been absent, but we've had numerous views from residents and businesses in terms of consultation when they've applied for a new consent. I've seen it that street trading consents can be granted, but again with the follow-up for planning permission to be obtained too. So there's a slight caveat. So there are some parallels, but if it's regulated, then the answer is they'll need both.
So I don't really understand, just because I don't, the difference between trading from your house, trading from a shop, trading on a street. My naivety was that street trading was trading on a street on public property, or maybe a car park or something like that, not trading from your house. And I just wonder if we're getting scope creep here a bit, where, you know, what's the difference between you selling cars from, oh, I don't know, kebabs from your house, or selling kebabs from a shop, or selling kebabs from a van? You know, where does the street trading finish? Why does it need a street trading license to sell it from your garage, but not from a shop? I'm just a bit unclear about where the boundaries are, and before we start scope creeping into every sale of kebabs from everywhere, can we just have a boundary as to what street trading is?
So street trading by definition is, the street is defined as any area where the public have access to. So if it's not paid, you may have it that there's a festival or a music festival, but people will be paying for a ticket to go in. So that wouldn't be street trading. If that, say for example, that festival was a free festival, then they would need street trading consents or so on and so forth. So there is a regime around street trading consents which is applied here. There's then also a planning aspect, and when the applications come in and as part of the decision criteria, should planning permission be required, the street trading consent process, we do ask for the planning permission to correspond to.
So if I decided to sell ice cream from my garage, you're saying I need street trading consent or not?
Presently, I would say that you would need street trading consent, because unless the public had to pay to get access, then you would.
So
an easy way to describe it would be if we compare maybe a public house. There'll be traders on the car park to a pub, but because the public have free access to that car park, then they would need a street trading consent, and the pub themselves could own the car park, but they'll still need a street trading consent because the definition of street is not a street, a residential street. The definition, the legal definition, is that an area where the public have free access.
So if I sell ice cream from my garage, I need a street trading consent, even though it's not really public access, it's just I'm letting them in there to buy the ice cream. But if I tried to sell ice cream from a shop, I don't. Even though the shop could have a flat above it, and that the ground floor of the shop could be a shop. So, if you know what I mean. So my garage is a shop, so what's the difference between my garage being used to trade ice cream or my garage being defined as a shop being used to trade ice cream, and if you've got planning permission to use it as a place that sells ice cream, I don't understand where the shop has planning permission rules. So what you're doing is putting an extra constraint on it, I think.
Just to put you off, Pauline, if you decide to sell ice
You're not
cream
buying
from your garage, we're all coming.
All right, okay. I'm just trying to understand.
We expect tables and chairs.
That's fine, it's okay. I'm just trying to understand.
Different licence.
It's a longer conversation, but I'd like to understand the differential.
Perhaps not for now, yeah. Okay.
I'm just going to go back, if I may, and just support Stephen's idea, because I'm pretty clear I understood that, therefore, anywhere that you're selling something from effectively becomes public space because you're inviting the public in. And therefore, I understand it comes under this legislation as street trading. So I like Stephen's idea, therefore, of putting some time limit on any of those sorts of trading so that you can't have a full-time business selling cars, fridges, or anything you like from your garden.
I like it as well, except I don't really understand what the difference between somebody selling ice cream from their garage every day all year is to a shop. And I'm finding it very difficult to differentiate, because what we're doing is putting an extra level of regulation on something that's called street trading above what shops have, but it's essentially the same.
I think arguably it would become, there will be extra legislation, won't there, for shops, as you say, planning permission.
Well, you need planning permission for both. So I don't understand.
Not to sell street trading ice cream.
No, you do if you're selling stuff from your house.
Can we come back to the agenda, Pauline, and perhaps you could take this up down the pub with us later on?
No, it's a serious question. I'd like an answer, but not necessarily now.
But perhaps offline, yeah. Have we now got to the position where we can vote that this document, as amended, can go to consultation? Yes?
Yes.
I've just proposed it.
I'm happy to second with a slight
Thank you.
caveat. Well, no,
Oh, no.
hang on, no, sorry.
I'm happy to second without a caveat.
Well, then in which case I can't support it because I haven't seen a clean copy of the policy document.
Oh, I see.
So I will happily second this with the caveat that a cleaned copy of the policy, with all of the hundreds of changes that have been proposed tonight, put forward tonight, is circulated to the committee. And then we have that chance to say yes, because otherwise I can't support something I haven't seen.
I was trusting him to put one.
I do trust him completely, but otherwise you're trying to approve something that...
And are you happy that we can give that approval online rather
Oh,
than...
no, absolutely. I'm not trying to
Okay.
stop it or anything else. I would just like to see a cleaned up copy with all the changes that we've discussed tonight just added into
Okay.
it. But the process is the same.
Okay, is that unanimous?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'll just look if there's anything else on the agenda. No. Oh, no.
I would say before this meeting, I think it'll only take 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think that was mine.